Peggy 18.
Dominus Vobiscum, stranger.
If this continues, soon Britain will be yours.
The people who lived here had a reputation for stalwart endurance.
Hello and welcome everybody. Welcome back. It's been a while, but we finally got another dev talk lined up for the day. And today is a special day. So hello and welcome everybody. Welcome to OPN's Dev Talks, where we get a chance to sit down with the developers and get to see gaming from their eyes. And for all our newcomers here today, we're Overpowered Noobs. Check us out at opnoobs.com. Now, joining us today from Logic Artist is Jonas Waever. Jonas is a Logic Artist creative director. Jonas is the guy around the office that makes the big game decisions, like how the game works, what the story and characters will be about, and what flavor of the sun lolly is in the freezer. Large scope, small team projects is Jonas' specialty, having jump-started his career as a lead designer of the Nameless mod, a fan mod of the original Deuces X, which won the Editor's Choice Award in 2009. The creative mod of the year. Jonas holds an MSc in game design and a BA, bachelor's degree, with a major in film and media studies. Jonas' specialties is game design, level design, and writing. Jonas, thank you for joining us today. New Logic Artist has a new game called Expeditions Viking. Syria, 790 AD, a small band of Norse warriors lands on the shores of England. History may have forgotten their names, but their actions live on. As the chieftain of your clan, let ambition guide your choices in party-based RPG expeditions. Viking, how will your history remember you? Now, joining us today from our T4I program is Lycia and Uriana Moon. I am your host, Shane Games, and let's get started. Now, join us. Tell us how you got into gaming and what led you to Logic Artist, the studio. Like, what got you to where you're at today?
Yeah, first, let me just say thanks for having me on the show. It's an honor to be here. Yeah, it's always been in the cards for me to be in game design, I think. I sort of discovered modding back in the Half-Life days. Started making Half-Life deathmatch levels, which were terrible because those were my first levels ever. And then I discovered Deus Ex, as you mentioned, and became very involved in that whole modification community there. Ended up spearheading one of the major total conversion projects, the Nameless mod. Very silly project that went on for 7 years. Was released in 2009. So as soon as I got a chance to, focus in on game development and actually gain some credentials other than the modding experience, I jumped on it, and that led me to study game development at the IT University of Copenhagen, where I met Ali and Juan, my partners in crime at Logic Artists. Ali really wanted to start a game studio, and I went along with it because it sounded awesome, and also because employment opportunities in Denmark are slim in the games industry. So starting our own company sounded like the best option. Then we made Expeditions Conquistador as our first project, which was a surprising success considering our lack of experience. And now we've just launched the sequel, Expeditions Viking, 5 years later.
Now, did you always know you would be involved in gaming? Is that something you wanted to do from a young age?
Pretty much. I think mainly I just wanted to be a writer early on, and then once I discovered that games was a thing you could do for a living, then that was an obvious way to kind of live out the creative drive, so to speak. Because it's almost like playing with your mates in the backyard in a way. It's the same kind of creativity. You're coming up with the framework of a story, and then you're just letting your friends loose in it and see what happens. That's what makes games particularly fun, I think. The synergy with what the player is doing.
Right. And so, what was some of your favorite games growing up? Just real quick, talk about
sure.
early years.
Right, early years, I spent an incredible amount of time in Might and Magic 6, the Mandate of Heaven. I think I played that with a friend for just half a year. We played it every week. And then Torment, Planescape Torment was a real game changer for me. The first game that it was purely the story that pulled me into that. I think everything else about it is a little ramshackle, but the story was amazing enough that it really left an impression. And then Deus Ex was the one that cemented what kind of games that I wanted to work on, and that this was a thing that I could do for a living. So those would be the most important ones.
How'd you feel about the new one, the new Deus Ex?
The new Deus Ex, I like it. I think Mankind Divided, I wish that it had an ending. But Human Revolution was almost perfect, I think, in my opinion. I love the original Deus Ex, of course, but it did need an update for it to work in the modern age. It is a bit dated in many ways. So I think they did a great job at updating the formula with that.
Right. All right. Well, before we get into some of the gameplay, I wanted to ask a quick question. Now, you mentioned Juan. He's the programming lead artist of Logic Games. And he's done a lot of research on machine imitation of human playstyles in Super Mario Brothers.
Right.
He's written a paper comparing a few different methodologies of programming AI to mimic human behavior in such a ways as to improve the perceived human likeliness. And so my question is, what is the AI in Vikings like? Did you guys, use Juan's research?
Juan's research is mostly about emulating human behavior in terms of testing a level. So it's about sort of automated testing. How do you code an AI to play the game like a human player would, so that you can catch the same kinds of bugs that a human player would run into, and so you can see how well it performs and so on and so forth. It does apply a little bit, sort of on a very high level, to the AI in Viking, but it's less about actual game AI that you would play against. I did ask him about this, and he said that one example of where it kind of comes into play is there are cases in Viking where making the AI just do the best possible thing or the smartest possible thing makes it seem less lifelike. He used the example of the ready ability we have in the game, where you forego your turn in order to attack the first person who comes into melee distance, and that was originally coded to just it would never approach the player if it had ready. It would just always activate ready and then wait for the player to approach it, because that was often the smartest thing to do. But that doesn't seem like something a player would do. A player would usually be more aggressive, and it also doesn't necessarily lead to fun gameplay. So a lot of the time we had to make the AI do things that seem human rather than are the smart choice. So in that sense, it sort of relates to Juan's research.
And I take it you were happy to have him on the team then, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, as the technical director, he had a lot of responsibilities, and we had another guy, Jens, who was primarily in charge of the AI and the combat system in general. But yeah, I mean, this would have never happened. This project would have never happened without him, definitely.
Well, because before we started the show, you were talking about how hard it is, and Lycia, you were explaining that you notice a much harder difficulty.
Yes. Yes, but without even realizing it. So when I first started playing the game, I knew that the strategy was important and that, you had to be tactical and stuff from what I was playing. But I just kept failing at everything. And I'm like, well, this is making me feel really bad about life. I know I'm not amazing at video games, but man, what am I doing wrong? And then just happened to thumb through the options and notice that I had it on insane difficulty. And I'm like, well, that's not where I want to start. No. So that was the first issue that I had a problem with myself, but once I moved it to medium, beautiful. beautiful. I was starting to get somewhere, feeling like a Viking, taking over, recruiting people. So, yeah.
It's a good idea to lower the difficulty a little bit.
Yeah. Trial by fire is great, but
yeah,
it's a little too hard.
Unfortunately, in version 1.1, the default difficulty is indeed insane, and that's obviously a bug we're working on right now. We're gonna have a hotfix up for it later today. It's a funny bug, but only once you notice that it happens.
Makes you really pay attention, though, to the tactical side. I tell you what, though, because I'm like, I must not really be paying attention to how I'm supposed to go about taking care of these people. So at least when I put it to medium, yeah, I was having no trouble at all figuring out the text. I'm like, I already did this. You guys aren't nothing now, you know?
So,
nice.
and Ariana, how did you like the whole Vikings setting for like just being?
I thought it was really great. Top-down view was nice, but and buildings and everything. One thing though, and I know this is just a little nitpicky. There's just things I noticed. But when I first logged in and I'm making my character creation, the scrolly embroidery look around the little frames for all your character development and where you pick things, it really struck me because I'm also a crafter. The gold looked like embroidery. It was really nice. It had the shimmery fabric thread-like look to it. I thought, that's really nice detail. So you never know who's looking at what in your game. So the littlest minute, mundane details and what actually stands out. But I really like that touch. And it actually goes into the game further with how you have some of the images for different icons and things. The colors on their clothing is beautiful. It's very colorful. It's not dark and drab and dirty like a lot of games or shows want to make Vikings out to be. And that's one thing I know I like about yours. You were taking a historical approach with it. So.
Yeah, we're very much conscious to make sure that there's that sense of authenticity. I don't like to use the word realism because that has some very specific connotations in games, but definitely to make the game world feel like we did our research, basically, and to make sure that it reflects what we know about the Vikings. Of course, there's a lot of room for interpretation and so on, but at least archaeological evidence is usually reasonably clear. And yeah, they really like to wear a lot of colorful clothes, and they did their hair up very nicely and cared about their looks. As far as we know, we find Vikings with a lot of combs and razor blades and so on. So we know they really cared about their appearance, and something like colorful clothes would be very important to them. Definitely, also makes the game look nicer.
So you guys wanted to be like accurate with the appearance of the Vikings, then, right?
Yeah, definitely. As much as possible, we went for visual accuracy, especially.
Well, that's interesting because actually, the Vikings and the Viking era seem to be a common motif for game developers to draw on when making their games. For example, searching the word Viking on Steam brings up 159 hits. So my question is, what do you think is so compelling about Vikings and their culture that attracts so many developers?
First off, I think the fantasy of the Viking as the raider, which corresponds to reality as far as we know it, is really well suited for video games in general. It's the same reason why pirates, for example, also work really well for video games, because there's that sense that you have a lot of power, a lot of self-determination. You have your ship that takes you to distant places, and you get to just go ashore and do whatever you want, basically, because you're an outlaw in a sense. You're a sea pirate, right? So I think in terms of just empowering the player to experience cool things and do interesting things, Vikings are really a useful kind of setting for that. I also think it's just the case that there weren't really many Viking games up until recently, and then there were a few major, the Vikings TV show, for example, made everyone realize, oh, hey, this is actually pretty interesting. And I mean, there's no denying that we were looking at that a little bit when deciding what to do next. We already had the idea before the Vikings TV show took off, but it was a good confirmation that there was there's some mysteriousness to them as well because of the pagan faith and the fact that it's so long ago. It has that medieval feeling to it, but it's so early medieval that we don't know as much about Vikings as we do about later stages of the medieval era, which means there's a lot of maneuverability, a lot of wiggle room for creative sort of liberty, I suppose.
Right.
So there's a lot of different reasons why I think Vikings are a great subject matter.
I guess my next part of that question would be like, why did you decide to go with I know you just explained Vikings, but like, how is that transition from the Conquistador themed, right? Like, how did you go from that and start to approach the Vikings?
One of the reasons, of course, I mean, the most obvious reason is because we're Danish, so it was here in a way. When we worked on Conquistador, it was really useful to have Juan on the team. He's not an expert in the history of Spain and Central America, but he knew enough about the culture and the language and so on that we got a lot of research for free, in a sense. We could just ask him. And he could double check things as well. And they did learn a fair bit about that period in school, right? So just knowing that it is very powerful to deal with something that you're already immersed in to some extent made it a very attractive option. And then there's the case that we wanted to take the expedition series, as it has become and hopefully will keep being, into a more RPG direction. Conquistador was, as far as I'm concerned, straight in the middle between the RPG genre and the strategy genre. And we wanted to, with Viking, go a little bit more towards RPGs, or a lot more towards RPGs, as it were. And Vikings play into that really well, I think. Like, there's that sense that you're a small raiding party. You don't necessarily lead a giant army, so it doesn't get too grand strategy. It stays on the small-scale tactical level. And it really fit well with the RPG tropes of having your group of companions that travel around with you, and they're the kind of freaks and weirdos usually in these games, which makes them so compelling. And they're not like a strictly regimented military force, for example. So there's a lot of ways in which the Viking era really fits the RPG genre, in my opinion.
Nice. And I wanted to talk to Lacey real quick. At the beginning, it showed you creating your character. How was that process for you?
Oh, it's fun. I mean, I like the character creation, but I'm not the person who spends like a whole lot of time on it. So, but what was interesting to me, it was like that you got to choose like a picture for what your Viking is, but then when you go to the character, you could make it look completely different. So that threw me a little bit because I was expecting, I guess, to just kind of like match up. But like Ariana was saying, the bright colors and stuff like that made it a little bit more fun, that you could individualize it. And then, of course, I think playing around with the men character creation was more fun because they have all the really awesome beards, which I'm sad that, we couldn't have, like, just really awesome beards and hairstyles and stuff like that. So, I had more fun actually delving into the putting in the skill points, because there's a lot you can choose from there with just what kind of weapon you want them to have, main hand or offhand, passive abilities, just your regular attacks, what kind of crafting you want them to do. So that's where it really got involved for me, which I really dug, because I was a fan of like the Dragon Age series and stuff like that, where you really got to really fine tune how you wanted everyone to be in your party. And that's where I really enjoyed it over just the creation of the character, they actually getting to fine tune how I wanted my character to be. So there's a lot to choose from there, and you got to really take your time reading it to decide how you want to play your character.
And Ariana, how would you feel about that? Like the whole character creation for you?
I felt the same way as Lacey did. I saw the box with the character there, and as I was changing things, I was noticing it was changing it on the body of it. And so that was a little bit confusing, but I loved it. I made my character. I chose the one with all the braids. Yes, I wanted a beard option, but that wasn't there for the female character. I'm sure that wouldn't be anyway, but it's just fun. But I do agree with you, Lacey, completely about how it's so fun to equip each character, and you get to pick their different stats, and you can do their strengths and that way you build an evenly distributed party. And the fact that you can give weapons to each other and switch out for who gets what, that was so fun. I haven't actually played much of a game like this. I think Planescape Torment a while back, I tried it out. But this was really easy as a new player to this type of genre. Your tutorials, the beginning prologue, made it a very easy step in and very enjoyable. I cannot wait to get back to it, really and truly. But I have a question. The character, Ketley, I hope I'm saying that name right. I'm just curious, was he inspired by Keeley from The Hobbit? Because he looks just like that.
Oh, I had not thought about that, but yeah, I guess actually. No, I don't think he was inspired by him at all, but it's a good point.
Oh, well, every time I looked at him, I'm like, I know this guy.
Just a fun happenstance.
And I had to go research and see, and I was like, oh, that's why. But I do love that you guys were inspired by Vikings. That was the first things I thought about when I was playing this. That was one of the questions I couldn't wait to ask you, was how inspired were you by the show? But it's really interesting to know that you actually had your idea for the show and started doing this. It did come out just at a good time. So it's great.
That was also, of course, an element of wanting to sort of do it differently than the show. I mean, once you look at the show and what they do, and they also take some creative liberties, and of course they take liberties in different ways than we would, so we get a little annoyed by that, and we go like, we'll do that correctly. Like when all these Danish Vikings somehow have giant mountains in the backgrounds, we're like, that's not how it looks over here and stuff. So that's that was a good way to get motivated as well.
Do you enjoy the show at least?
I've only been able to watch a couple of episodes because then I sort of suffer from creative paralysis. Like I feel like they're doing so many interesting things and they're treating all the different aspects of the period and history. So I sort of get scared that I'll be completely unable to do anything because they've done it already. And I was like, I can't do that. Vikings already did it. And then I won't be able to do anything at all. So I now that the game is out, I should actually just binge watch the entire series.
Yeah, you can just enjoy it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's what it is.
So we're talking about character creation. Like, how important is that to you? I feel like it's a huge piece of the game.
Yeah, that is insanely important to us. I mean, it's a staple of the RPG genre, obviously, so it has to be there. But also, we've put in a lot of work. Conquistador didn't really let you create your own character. You got to assign a few skill points and then pick between male or female. We didn't really have the resources to do a whole character creation thing. And also, your character did not show up in combat. They were more of a commander from the behind the front lines. So everyone really wanted a character creation system and a character that they could play themselves based on Conquistador. So we obviously knew we had to spend a lot of time and energy getting that right. I think Conquistador had 20 character abilities, and we have something like 80 in Viking now. So, and one of our focus points was making sure that the abilities are designed very orthogonally from each other in a way, so that there's no real overlap between them, and it's not just about changing the stats a little bit. It's also about giving you completely new tactical options and creating synergies between the other abilities and so on and so forth. So a lot of work went into making it interesting and not just feature-rich, I guess you could say.
And my question, like my follow-up question to that is for, we have a lot of young developers who are watching the show. How do you start to tackle character creation? Like, where does it start?
Well, it starts with a giant spreadsheet. I mean, first we need to figure out how many resources we have, both in terms of programming and in terms of art. We need to know how many skills and abilities we can implement. We need to know how many different customization options for arms and torso and so on we can do. Of course, we spent some time just prototyping the combining the different components of the characters so that we knew what we could even do. Decided to go with one torso and legs sort of combined in there, for example, because that made sense in terms of how the character system worked. So all these things need to be worked out first through prototyping and through many spreadsheets. And then based on what we have time to do, then we just start implementing. We started with the level 1 abilities first, for example. Made sure that they all were different from each other and interesting, that the level 1 weapon abilities, for example, represented the weapon well. and then we just added more and more to it once we knew we had the foundation.
Nice.
Were you more thinking about the skills and abilities or more the visual part?
Well, I was kind of like the whole thing, I guess, like how much time that goes into it, like, because some games have tons of options, some games don't. I guess my question, you answered part of my question. I guess my other question is to that is, how do you know when too much is too much, I guess is my point. Like, how do you know when to stop? Like, okay, we have enough options.
Well, you basically stop when you run out of time, I guess. We've been adding to it for the entire development. Obviously, we had a long list to begin with, and we were moving through it gradually. At some point, you get what you really want into the game, and then you can start looking at the result and finding out what if you need to add anything to balance out some of the existing stuff, or if you need to take some things away, and so on and so forth. And you can always keep tweaking and polishing those knobs until the end of time, basically. So at some point, unfortunately, you have to release the game.
Right. And it's funny because the reason I talk about character creation, because storyline's important, right, for your game. Viking is fairly hefty. And Logic Artists announced in February that they were increasing the approximate word count of the game to around 200,000. From 200,000 to 280,000. The story is also branching and reactive to players' choices. The design element of having players choose affect the storyline but there's definitely ways that the creative choices can backfire on the developer. So my question is, how have you ensured that the players in Expeditions, Vikings, feel that their choices make a real tangible impact on how their story unfolds?
Yeah, it's always a challenge to make sure that you understand those connections as a player, because we can have all the complexity in the world behind the scenes. But if you don't understand that something happens as a result of an earlier action, then it's wasted in a sense. Right. We've spent a lot of time both making sure that there are consequences to a lot of your actions, both the big ones and the small ones. It's important to us that we don't necessarily signpost that a certain decision will have consequences later. Some of the decisions you make, you're basically warned up front. This is gonna come back to kick you in the ass later. But a lot of the little things you can do along the way will get mentioned later, or you'll get another item for it or something like that. And you're not always sure whether your actions will have consequences or not. And I think that's a big part of the of making it feel complex and unpredictable in a sense. But as long as you know that once the consequence happens, that it was because of something you did previously, then I think that's what makes it compelling. Mm-hmm. It's a very, it's a huge amount of work, as you know. Like, as you also mentioned, we had to increase the word count there. Our original budget was 225, I think.
208,000, yeah. That's a lot.
Yeah, we have a total of more than 300,000 words in the end, but 35 of that is interface and so on and so forth. I believe pure dialogue, it's 260,000 words or something like that.
It's very immersive. I felt like really in there with my character and the storyline, and you're so right about how you made the characters feel like you know what you were doing or you didn't, because sometimes I'd make a decision and Ketley would go, "Are you sure you want to do that? Maybe that's not really the thing." And I had to play it more like a Viking than myself. I'm a little bit more passive. And the fun part was I have to go, okay, I got to go in and kick some butt, put it that way. And your choices are important, because I made this decision and I was like, oh, maybe that wasn't the right one, but it's too late. Couldn't go back. It was done. And the action took place and everything went on. And so I have to keep going. And that's another thing I think is great, because it leads to more playability. I would go back and replay again just to make different decisions and see how it would play out differently. Because this time I'm doing more defense. Maybe next time I want to play more as a trader or raider, things like that. So I like the different ways you can branch and go on that. But you got a deep storyline. I wondered about that too. Did y'all have storyboards? You branched out the trees on how the story was going to go?
I wish I could say we did. On the first campaign, like the Denmark part of the storyline, we ended up creating a big possibility tree for the QA department so that they knew that they had tested everything well enough. Of course, there's always things that slip through the cracks, but at least it helped us make sure that everything was tested. Mostly everything is, I'm the only full-time writer on the team, and I'm also doing lead design, so still technically not full-time. And then we had Daniel, our other designer, helped out a little bit along the way with some side quests and random events. And then we had one contractor in for a couple of months called Elan, who did most of the side quests in Ribe, for example. But mostly it was me alone, so a lot of the time it's just in my head for most of the process, and then at some point I feel like I'm done, and then it's kind of time to map it all out and figure out if I got everything or if I missed something, and how do we test this, and so on and so forth. So unfortunately, a lot of the time the planning happens after the fact, which is not ideal. But
that's impressive with how branching the story can be. And you mentioned side quests. I am an explorer. I looked in those woods, and at the very bottom, on this very low part, was this guy all by himself. And I felt so great that I found him and found that side quest, because I thought, as most people that I've watched, they just stay on the main storyline and go through. And that was like a little Easter egg to me, just a little sign.
You mean you didn't rob him? You let him be?
I did. I got him all his treasures. I had to go get his bear claw, but, I didn't rob him too badly. He didn't have it on him, so I had to go find
more
it.
of a proper Viking than the other person.
I was just like, let's go all out. Let's just forget it. Like I lied at first, though. I'm like, I'm totally going defense. So like my cousin would be on board, but then as I was playing along, I'm like, I'm just going to keep changing my mind and seeing how upset I can get him. And he gets really mad. He's not happy about it. I think he raised mutiny on my first playthrough. Yeah. I was like, they're all leaving me. And that's when I get all a little bit more hardcore once I had to start it again.
So Lacey, you enjoyed the story, I take it?
Did. And and like I said, the first time that I played it when it was on Insane, once I realized it wasn't, I actually started a new game so I could try to see, and it changed quite a bit actually, because with me losing everything and then coming back and actually winning a lot of the victories, it really did change how everyone reacted, and it was kind of interesting. And I took more time to talk to all of the extra characters that were in the beginning and realized that there was so much story to be fleshed out there that I kind of missed the first time with being just a little bit, frustrated with how I was playing the game. So yeah, I was really interested in how those story arcs kind of came out and how they reacted so differently for me being a better warrior, or one that they were like, well, she's never going to lead us to anywhere. And so mutiny, and then they leave. So it was much nicer feeling to go back and do it a lot better. So the story choices and the consequences, like that's where I really got into the story there. I'm not that far along. I think I've gotten to the point where I've recruited like 2 or 3 people. So I haven't gotten on the boat and sailed yet, but there's a lot there if you take the time to have a conversation with everyone along the way that you can have the conversation with. And I think if you choose as a perception or one of those, that opens up even more chat dialogue, which I like to choose because I am more into getting in depth with the story, because I noticed the second time when I chose that different perk, there was more things to even say to certain people, and I really dug that. I really liked that.
Diplomacy, so I think that adds that. Yeah, you mentioned that things played out differently when you were losing and so on. That's one of the main focus points we've had along the way. We had a few major things in the game where the mechanics would influence the story. Like depending on whether you kill people in battle, you have a non-lethal option that you can enable that will ensure that nobody dies. They may still survive if you don't have that enabled, but then it's just kind of down to how much damage you deal on the last hit that downs them.
Okay.
So if you, for example, want to make sure that someone survives the fight, you can enable non-lethal mode, and obviously that has to change what happens after the fight. Whether you win or lose the fight changes a lot of the story, especially in the beginning of the game, but also in the end. So there's a few of these things that, and also as you mentioned, the main stats and the skills and so on are often checked in the dialogue as well. There's a lot of ways we try to make the gameplay influence the story just as much as your dialogue choices changes the situations you'll face, right? And
yeah,
that's been a big challenge for us, but I think it's a really interesting challenge.
Yeah, they liked me better when I just decided to kill them, though. Then my people were like, yeah, she's really leading this place. We're going to go. So I just was like, oh, well, I like the praise, so I'm just going to keep going that way.
Sure.
And
You're
Jonas,
true Thane.
and you were talking about how you did a lot of the story. I mean, can the game still surprise you, like being the person who does the story part of it?
Nothing in the story can surprise me. Let me put it that way. But the AI still occasionally does stuff that I didn't know it could do, because I didn't work on the AI, right? So sometimes I'm fighting someone, and like it's a while now, but like a month ago or something, when it became possible for the AI to kick you into environmental hazards and stuff, I think I got kicked into a campfire, and I was very upset about it. So that, yeah, in that sense, it can surprise me a little bit, of course, and also because sometimes there's some randomization going on in the events, and it's fun if it picks a particularly inappropriate character to do something random in an event. Always. And then you go, should I fix that? Should I make that impossible?
Oh.
How's the community response to it, Jonas? Like, upon releasing, like, how's the Steam community reacted to it?
Mostly positive, I would say. I mean, that's at least the rating on Steam right now. I think people have been really waiting for a game like this. It had more bugs in it upon release than we thought. We've gone through 3 stages of closed beta testing, so we really thought we'd ironed out all of the quest bugs and so on. But once you get 10,000 people playing it over the weekend, obviously a lot of extra little things show up. Like if you do these 3 main story quests in a certain order, and then the last one has maybe 7 different ways you can do it, and if you pick one specific way through that, then something breaks. And even if only 3% of players find that, that's still a bunch of people whose experience is interrupted by that. So right now we are really stressing out about getting all the bugs fixed as fast as possible. But everyone seems to think that it's an interesting game with a good story, and the combat is engaging and challenging and so on. So I think we're pretty happy with the reception.
It means a lot that you care about that and are very active on getting that fixed. That sometimes the game comes out and that happens, and the devs are like, okay, we'll get to it. And 3 weeks later, the problem is still there. So that's really awesome to hear you guys are on top of that.
Yeah, we've already, we patched the day after release. We'd been working on that patch for a few days. Obviously, we need time to test it and so on and so forth. And we are getting a hotfix up today for that difficulty bug as mentioned, and then the next patch will be out next week. So we definitely want to get all of this cleared out as fast as possible. And I've been totally camped out on the forums the entire time, just trying to answer everyone's questions and be a responsible community manager, I suppose. Oh, wow. Since we don't have a community manager, it's just going to be me.
So you decided to take on the Steam community head on then?
Yeah, I mean, people like to see that the actual developers are interacting with them. I mean, obviously we have Alex as our PR guy, and he does a great job as well, but he mostly handles the press, because I think people want to talk to actual developers who have the power to fix things, for example, if they have a problem, or who can answer specific system design questions and so on and so forth.
It's interesting because I talk to a lot of developers, and they tell me that players want different things based off of provided if the game works, right? Like, first and foremost, gamers want the game to work. But obviously, yeah. But outside of that, like the things that they want, like the little nuances, depends on like where they come from. Like the Americans want different things than what what Russia wants. Have you found that to be true?
Yeah, somewhat, I think. I mean, mainly everyone other than English-speaking countries just want the game to be in their language. And we can't always deliver on that because translating 300,000 words is really expensive.
Yeah, it's probably a lot.
We do have the world's longest thread about how the game should be an open world, infinitely replayable thing instead of story-driven. And that always... I guess it always makes us laugh a little bit because that they're basically asking for the entire game to be changed. Right. But I suppose in the nuances, I haven't really noticed any cultural differences, I would say. I did notice that Eastern Europeans tend to complain that the game is too colorful. So maybe that's a cultural thing there. Whereas Americans and Anglophones in general are happy that it's not gray and brown. Right. So that's one thing I've noticed.
Right. And it's funny that you brought up the localization aspect of it. I mean, how is that for the indie world? Like localization, especially in a big game like this. Like 200. You said 300,000 text. How is that world when it comes to localization of an indie game?
It's hellish. I've spent so much time over the past month just getting. I mean, we had to send the first batch out back in October. We sent the entire Denmark campaign out. We have some regional partners who are handling distribution in different parts of the world. Like we have Eurovideo handles it in Germany and IMGN Pro handles it in Eastern Europe, and they help us localize into their languages. So we don't actually have to foot the bill for the French, German, Russian, and Polish versions, but it's still been on us to implement all the stuff, and we had to finalize and send out the Denmark campaign in October, which was a really early deadline for us. And then they needed the rest of the text 1 month ago, and we were still like frantically fixing things and adding the last bits and bobs. So keeping track of what we changed since the last time we sent out the localization text and so on, it's been a huge mess. And I know that there are still some little things in the Russian version, for example, because I didn't have the time to go over the localization QA results and so on and so forth. It's been a lot of work. And for example, it turns out Slavic languages change the entire sentence structure depending on the gender of the subject. So if the player is a woman or the player is a man, the entire sentence will change. And we needed to have a lot of parsing tools in the game for that to be possible. So there was a lot of back and forth with the Polish translator about what he needed and where it wasn't working correctly and so on and so forth.
Wow. How many languages is the game currently in?
5. Let me just count. It's French, German, Polish, Russian, and then English, obviously. And we've got a Czech fan group working on a localization. They asked if they were allowed to, and we said, sure, go for it, but we're really getting into trouble here. And then there's one insane guy who's doing a Danish localization, like a friend of a friend who's working on that, and will hopefully deliver it in May. And I feel so sorry for him because he has to do it all alone.
Oh wow! Oh man! And so is there any other languages planning to come out, or is that pretty much it?
We'd love to do more languages, but it depends on the sales of the game, also in the different regions and so on. We'll see what we end up being able to do.
Because localization isn't cheap, from my understanding, right?
No, it isn't, especially if you want it done right.
Right. Right, because you want to make sure it all flows the same. And where has your biggest player base come from? Like what region?
Well, it's always the US. Yeah, and then England and Germany. I think all Great Britain and Germany are the sort of 3 major groups. Nice. France also, especially now that we actually have a French translation. None of our other games have come out in French, but this time we made it. So it's looking good for French sales as well.
Now, I want to move on to the next part, which is, one of the very common element of player choice that many developers choose to include are romance options. And Expeditions, Vikings, they definitely have them. There are 4 romance options in the games, right? There's 2 hetero, 2 bisexual, as well as 1 NPC of gender of each player can seduce. How do you feel that romantic relationship options enhance the gameplay experience for the players in Vikings?
Romance is one more way that people can connect with the NPCs. I mean, a lot of the time, role-playing is all about engaging with the characters in the game in different ways, right? We try to make you hate certain characters, so you really want to kill them, and then we obviously don't let you kill them until late in the game, so you can carry that torch. We try to make you really feel protective of certain characters or feel like you owe them something and so on and so forth. It's all about trying to get you to connect with the NPCs, and romance is a strong way to do that, obviously. If we can make you, I guess, desire a character or want to be with them in that sense, then that's a success. So but just that basic thing, that it's a way for you to engage with the game on a deeper level.
Right. And so you decided to offer 2 heterosexual and 2 bisexual potential partners, but not any homosexual partners. What was that decision for?
That was mainly a selfish decision. It's because for me it takes ages to write a romance. It's so hard because it needs to be really emotionally engaging, but you can't let it deteriorate into soap opera. So it's very difficult balance to make sure that we hit the right buttons, but not too hard in a way.
Right.
And you also need to make sure it doesn't come across as, just the writer's weird fantasy, like you're reading someone's diary or something.
Right.
So it's a lot of hard work for me to write those romances, and I guess I want as many people as possible to see them. And so for me, I know that, the proportion of homosexual people is relatively low. So making a purely homosexual romance I don't know. I just ended up making them bisexual instead, so that more people would have access to them, basically.
Right. So, and like, how was that like design? Like, I guess my question is, you were diving into the romance aspects of it. I think of games like Mass Effect, especially one. How long does it take you like to come up with that, like to do it right? I guess my question is, instead of like what you're saying, which is like not feeling like you're reading somebody's diary, but you're like legitimately trying to advance the story.
Yeah. The process is mostly waiting for inspiration, which is terrible. I can't really sort of just sit down and start doing a romance. I leave it. I mean, fortunately, a game production takes 2 years. So at some point, you're probably gonna feel like, oh, I have an idea. So I usually write the really difficult parts of the game at somewhere between like 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. in the morning, because there my sort of my sense of second guessing myself or criticizing myself is sufficiently worn down that I can get over those humps. And then it obviously turns out terrible, so I can polish it the next day in the office. And then it's just question of, yeah.
So sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You go ahead.
Sure. It reminded me of Ernest Hemingway's quote. It's not actually a quote from him, but it said, "Write drunk, edit sober." So you can really get into it that way.
Yeah, I've adopted that.
I was also going to say, I'm sorry, what?
No, I've adopted that into write tired, edit awake. But yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Good point there.
Was there something else? Sorry.
Oh no, it was good. I was just going to say that seems to be your way to go. That's really good, because then your brain is free to think about all those things and process everything and get up the next day and go for it. So it's got to be a difficult challenge for sure on things where you don't know. I was just talking about that with a friend of mine, and there's lots of fanfic and boards out there that can help you with that.
Sure. I think the key then afterwards is that you need to show it to some of the people in the office. And then if you feel like you're too embarrassed to show it to them, then you would also be too embarrassed to have it in the game. So then you can work on it until you no longer feel like it would be shameful to watch someone else sit there and read it while you're standing behind the chair.
Was that an option that you guys wanted, like before going into the game, like the whole romance side of it, or is that something that kind of evolved in the production?
No, that was always planned. We had 2 romance options in Conquistador, just the basic male-female heterosexual options. And there was a few things about them that I was really happy about. For example, the fact that the sort of female romance option was consummated really early. It almost started with the sex, and then it continued from there. And that's sort of the opposite of how it normally goes in RPGs. And I thought that turned out really well, because then it feels more like a relationship and less like you're just chasing someone. Right. And I wanted to explore different ways to sort of subvert the usual RPG romance tropes a little bit in the next game as well. And we wanted to add more options, obviously, because when there's only one choice for each gender, then it's not really a choice. You can take it or leave it.
Right.
So just having twice the amount of romanceable characters added a lot in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think romance is important. I like it when it's put into video games. I don't know why. It just makes the game feel a little bit more personal, I guess. And it was always a fun experience for me. I look at like games like Mass Effect and a game like this, like the video games, I looked at as the male dating sim, essentially, right? Like that's what we can get into. Like when you can beat some stuff up, and then go tell your NPC wife all about it. So like I enjoy that part of it. So Lacey, moving on, what was your favorite part of the game?
I honestly think it was the combat. I liked that it wasn't just going in, smashing buttons, doing all that sort of thing. Like, you absolutely had to plan it out. And you were kind of talking about it earlier too, with the steady stance or whatever that would make them attack if you came within the circle. Well, it was the same thing with that attack of opportunity. So if they got right next to you, you had to really think about how you were going to play it, especially if I had like my healer or something that was right there, who tends to be a little more squishy. Like, how am I going to get her out of this situation without it being 2 hits? And I think it was that one level where you had to go into the tomb. I don't know if I want to say too much. I don't know if it's spoiling a whole lot. That was about as far as I got, where it's all like wavy and makes you feel all trippy. They surround you so fast, and I think I played it like 5 or 6 times because I was determined I'm going to beat this. They're not going to take me, but you have to use a specific skill that allows you to run away without them using that attack of opportunity. But you don't want to overuse it either because you're not able to attack at all. So to really have to sit down and think about who does what and how you're going to be able to overtake or take cover this time, or I really enjoyed trying to figure that whole thing out, and then deciding after a failure, where do I need to put my new experience points into to try to make this more of a success. So kudos on that. I enjoyed being able to figure that out. I'm not great at it yet, but I think I'm starting to figure that out a little bit more. And as I get more people, I would imagine it probably gets a little bit even more strategy wise, because I've only got like 4 people in my party right now, or 5 people in my party, but you have to really use their skills. You have to really think about who needs to go into where and attack when. And I like that.
Cool.
And Oriana, what would you say is your favorite part of the game?
I agree. I like the strategy of it, but I'm really digging the storyline and where everybody's at, and thinking about how you're going to deal with the different things and who you want to side with, maybe trade with, or overtake. But now I'm intrigued. I haven't gotten to the romance part, so
I haven't either.
No, I've got my eye on somebody in particular now. I'm not sure if it's an option, but I guess I'll get to find out. So I make sure to save my party like you. The healer is a tricky thing to kind of keep them alive and make sure that I can get my characters to them. So
yeah, especially on the opposite side, those healers like to run away, and you're like, no, quit throwing that buff to demoralize me and get closer so I can take you out already, you know?
Yeah.
Like, stop helping the other team so much, would you?
Right.
I think for me, one of my favorite parts of the game is, I'm going to say it, I like the colors. I think the colors in the soundtrack was good. Really,
it is a gorgeous game.
It is, yeah. It's definitely pretty. So Jonas, there was a question that was in chat from one of the viewers, and they were wondering: is romance always important, or can you just have a good partnership? Like, do you have to have the romance to progress through the story?
In our game in specific, or
yeah, in your game specifically, Vikings.
No, it's purely an optional thing. The NPCs will try to initiate romance with you if they have enough morale, and if everything else aligns, obviously. And you're free to sort of gently or not so gently rebuff their advances if you're not into that part of it. You don't really need to get romantically involved with anyone. It's purely a side thing.
Right. And I wanted to talk. One of my personal questions I want to ask about before we ended up here is the trailer, the intro, the voice actor to that. How did that come about? Because that's an awesome way to, like, how she starts off, really soft tone, and then she gets like really into it, like near the end of it, and it's like you wanting to go chop some heads off.
Yeah.
Like, how did that come about? Just talk a little bit about the trailer.
Sure. I mean, we knew it was we wanted it to be just 1 minute. And that meant we had a surprisingly long amount of time to get it just right, because usually you rent a sound studio for an hour. And normally when we do recordings, we have way too little time, so we're just powering through it. Right. So we went into the studio, and we managed to find, I think, the only Icelandic actress in Copenhagen, because I really wanted that sort of Icelandic accent, because it's the closest we have to Old Norse. It's not Old Norse, but it's close. So we found one actress, and she was up for it. And we just spent one hour just recording it over and over and over again, doing, I think, 30 takes or something in total. And then our sound guy Nils spliced together out of all the takes the end result so that it had like the maximum curve of intensity there that you ended up hearing in the game.
It was pretty intense towards the end.
Yeah.
Did you write that? Like what she needed to say? Like, how'd you guys come up with that? Like when you coming up with a trailer, you have to make it, you have to make it impactful. Like, so my question is, what was the process? Like, you wrote that, I take it, right?
Yeah, exactly. That was just me writing it. We needed it quickly, so I wrote it quickly and then went over it to make sure it was short enough and so on. Deleted half of it, obviously, because it wasn't.
Was that one of those 2 a.m. writings? But it was awesome. Very inspired.
Yeah, I think that was one of those 2 a.m. writing sessions.
No, it was definitely amazing. Now, before we end the show, Jonas, what's your favorite part of the game? Like, what's your favorite thing about Vikings?
I'm really proud of how all of the choice and consequence came together in the end, especially because I was really stressing out about how insanely overcomplicated things get at the end. Like once you have to decide between the different factions in Britain, I'll try not to spoil too much, but it really becomes a huge mess to keep track of, and there's still some kinks to iron out, but I think especially at that point in the game, you really get the sense that your choices throughout the entire game have mattered, and a lot of the little things come back in the end to kind of go, hey, remember back in the first 4 hours of the game when you did something? Well, now you've played 40 hours and here's the result or something. So there's that sense of really long-term choice and consequence, and I'm really proud of how that came together.
Nice. And who's your romance option? Who do you pick?
It's difficult. They're all, I mean, the problem is they're all characters that I've created, so I feel awkward romancing any of them. But
that's what I was wondering. Are you gonna bash one of them? I mean, it's your baby.
No, I think I would have to go with Nefia because she is basically an ex-girlfriend of mine that I just sort of based her on. So that one would be obvious.
The plot thickens.
Yes.
Oh wow! And
I'll have to check this one out.
And so for Logic, what's next? What's after Vikings?
It depends. We have a couple of different projects that we're working on, and as always with these things, which one gets made depends on who gives us money. Hopefully, we can attract a publisher, and then that's the one we're doing.
Go ahead.
We definitely have a sequel planned
to this game, Vikings.
Yeah, another expeditions game, right?
Right.
We'll see if that becomes the next game or if we end up doing something else first.
Are you planning on like expanding outside of the genre?
The RPG genre, or?
Yeah, the RPG genre. Are you planning on like ever going, like first person or like something completely different?
Not anymore. We did. I skipped it handily in the beginning when I introduced myself, but we did a third-person stealth action co-op game before Viking, after Conquistador, and it was not a success. So no, we're done experimenting outside.
Stick to what works then.
Yeah, exactly.
And is there anything you could say about the game that hasn't already been said? Like right now, you got the floor to talk about Vikings. Is there anything that you want to say about the game that just hasn't been out there?
I mean, I usually like to take the opportunity to say that if anyone likes the game and plays it or just wants to know more about it, to please show up on the Steam forums and post whatever questions you have. We hang out there and spend way too much of our time on those forums, so we're always happy to answer any questions and help people if they have any problems with the game or if there's just something they want to know before they decide whether or not to purchase it.
Right. All right, and how long are you planning to support the game in terms of patches?
As long as possible, obviously. We're doing at least full-time support for it for the foreseeable future, and then at some point we'll start taking people off of it to work on the next projects. But at the moment, it definitely needs everyone's attention.
Right, and the game right now is $26.99, right? It's 10% off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a launch discount.
And there's a digital deluxe edition, right? And there's little goodies included in that, I take it?
Yeah, you get the soundtrack, which is composed by Knud Avenstrup Haugen, who is an award-winning composer. You may know him from Age of Conan and Lords of the Fallen.
Oh wow!
And we had that mastered by what he insists is the best mastering engineer in Norway. So definitely check that out if you get the chance. It may be the best part of the game, just the soundtrack.
Yeah, I do enjoy.
And you also get a digital art.
Yeah,
I do enjoy the music. I also love the art too.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, the art was pretty good. I like the way it looks, I guess, like kind of like that watery, pasty look. It was really good. And then you have a free DLC, right?
Yeah, it was something we gave away for packs. So we gave keys out for that, and then anyone who subscribed to our newsletter got it as well. It's just a tier 2 sword that you can pick up a few hours into the game if you have it. And at some point we'll just release it for everyone. But for now, it's exclusive to the people who got the code.
Oh wow! Because I was looking at the DLC called Blood and Ice.
Yeah, that's
what I saw too. Yeah,
That's what it's called, right? Blood and
the
Ice.
sword is called Bloodies. Yeah, blood ice.
Oh wow! That makes me think of Fire and Ice. Do you read Game of Thrones?
I do.
Do you like the show?
Yeah, I love the show. Actually, I'm really looking forward to the final season.
I think everybody is. No, I think the game looks great. It's like I said, guys, it's on sale for $26.99. And yeah, I think overall, I think this is a fantastic game if you're into Vikings and RPGs. Like I said, I like the romance option. I do. I think it's fun. I think it's. I think more guys like it than people know. So I always enjoy it. But with that being said, I think we're going to go ahead and end the show for the day. Thank you so much for Jonas for coming on and talking to us about Vikings.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot for inviting me on. That was great.
Thank you. It's a great game.
It is a great game. And thank you, Lacey and Oriana. And as always, guys, stay tuned to OPN as we bring more Dev Talks in our next Game Monthly show. Until next time, guys, everybody have fun and see you guys later.